Um,
You,
yeah. I like a little app. Sure, my car is on.
yeah, make sure your car's not playing or still there. Like,
The way my day's going, like I could have just walked away.
Yeah.
And it's a hybrid, so sometimes like my husband's in it.
right there.
He's like, why won't it lock? I'm like, is it still on? I know.
Well, I rented a car over Thanksgiving to drive down to my mom's in Arizona. I needed a bigger car with all the kids. And it was a Hyundai Santa Fe, one of the brand new
Big one.
high-tech models.
Yeah.
And some of the technology in it was fascinating. But
Yeah.
one that was annoying, there's many that were annoying. But one was at a gas station. When I'd go in there'd be kids in the car and I'd
Yep.
go in, use the restroom, I'd lock the car. But if the driver wasn't in the seat,
Yeah.
the like emergency alarm starts going up and the kids are all in the car. They're all in the car. And I'm in the store like wondering like who starts it?
You're like, oh man, somebody.
We just did that with my parents had their dog and just a little.
Yeah, the dog does it too.
Yeah, the dog that, we're, same thing with that restaurant. We got, had to turn off their alarm.
Mary, I canceled the print job, sorry. I'm still just on number 3. Wow. Here. This is a full packet if you need.
Oh,
one.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
would just suggest us
Thank you.
From
together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll,
I've printed everything before.
oh, got you.
IPA.
You're funny. Gonna do it out of.
Well, I just logged it back, logged to.
You want me to drive the screen? I don't have a lot of duties today, so I can help with that.
Might be helpful.
You're watching the County now, like one on story,
Like last.
David Knight.
If there's nobody on the WebEx that's not here, you can just share your screen through the white plug.
Yeah.
I've got Craig.
Oh shoot, and I'm, I can hear myself. Yeah, I'm actually having trouble getting to the screen. It's not showing up on my computer.
WebEx for years now.
Yeah, probably
So what are we trying to do?
that screen.
You want this to be on the screen?
Didn't even.
Looks like.
I know Mike Yang that he'll be joining us for a few minutes late, well, David Johnson.
Check something else. Yeah, that's what I did.
I know.
Somebody thinking, so.
They must be, yeah, downstairs. Weird.
Well, I think whenever staff ready with the presentation, we can get started. We're missing, 2 board members. Yeah, Tori and, David Nye.
You could just use it now.
I don't need to get my notes and tell you. Five.
Yeah.
Oh. But,
That's just,
but that's going on.
I know, it's just your WebEx crashed out.
Hello.
You haven't missed a thing, David.
Good to see you. See you.
No, yeah, that was available. Feeling better this time than last time we saw you? Yeah,
Yeah, that's probably. I didn't have COVID test at home, but
yeah.
it felt like something pretty rough.
Like,
Private.
Yeah, just,
there's water, coffee, drink in the fridge.
Cool, right?
you might need to switch the input to me if you want me to.
I think I might need to unplug you.
I gotta,
From the.
I think it's just an input, you change your remote. Can you hand me that black remote?
Like, oh, the remote.
All right, if you don't need the presentation immediately, start.
You know, I get to.
How's
How's it going?
Pretty good. Well, I'm up now, so. Got me. There, WebEx. There's no WebEx. It's not.
I don't know if you, whatever.
That's probably the problem.
Did you save it to the company drive?
No, we're
The, yeah.
Do it as you want.
I can just access it. If you tell me to go.
When I,
Company,
It's called FLMM.
Oh, it's not.
under company drive.
it's in the company drive. I'm at it now. It looks like the latest one was updated at 2 AM on the 12th.
No.
Draft to guess, is that the best Wi-Fi?
That's what I jumped on.
Yeah, that's on that too.
Well, if you just, I'm connected, so I can just.
Right.
Go into a regional company.
Yeah.
File.
Okay.
And then, FLMM committee.
Okay.
And then very top one is board advisory committee, January 2025. You're gonna scroll down to about the middle and it says FLMM board meeting presentation, final PowerPoint.
Done?
Yeah.
Okay. There we go.
All right, are we ready to get started with that?
I think so.
Okay. We go ahead and call the meeting to order and start with roll call, please.
Right, screen better.
And put it on there.
David Besencheck,
Here?
Mary Harlan, here. Kurt Ravenschlag,
Here.
Greg Poshman,
Here.
Corey. Ben,
Here.
Aaron. Here. Paul, David Knight,
Here.
David Johnson.
Can you send me the?
Yeah.
Other folks joining us, could you introduce yourself?
I'm Lee Barger, City Glenwood.
Oh, great.
Transportation.
I didn't recognize you. I've seen you on
Yeah.
TV time.
Right.
I'm not in-
It happens all the time.
And Mirta's here from Weeside. Great. Well, thank you both for being here. Let's see, first item on the agenda is approval of minutes from last meeting, December 9th. Motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion by Greg, second by Colin. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstain? Okay, motion carried. Now the meat of the meeting, presentation and action items, starting off with a discussion of and a slideshow from staff. I'll just start by reminding us, maybe in this presentation, but just our purpose here, as approved by the board, I believe, is to define RAPT's long-term role in first and last mile mobility, first last mile.
My bad.
mobility. Specifically addressing funding. So I think keeping that on our radar, that's our main thing. And I'd love for us to have some discussion today of our timeline, sort of where we are. I missed the last board meeting, the RAPT meeting, so I'm not sure if our work so far, if that hasn't been shared out with the board. So what that looks like and we expect to have. But with that, I'll hand it over to staff for a presentation and get us into the discussion. Thank you.
And actually, real quick, we do have Tori online now and Craig, as well as Lynn Romoff. Craig Dubin.
Craig's with RAFTA, Lynn's with City of Aspen.
Okay, thank you all for being here.
All right, welcome to the next Raptor Board of Directors Advisory Committee meeting for first last mile mobility. I'm going to be giving a slideshow. There's a pretty robust section in it about the town of Basalt case study that we did. And so interrupt any time if there are any questions. Next slide, please.
Tori, can you hear us online?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay. Thanks.
Great.
All right.
So the agenda today, we'll just take a quick review of the December 9th meeting. We'll look at current and future funding opportunities, the case study with the town of Basalt. We'll explore a unified transportation app, which I have to apologize because the memo does make it look like transit app is the thing, but it actually is just an example that I'm familiar with. I was able to find some other examples. We'll look at an integrated transportation map that was discussed at our last board advisory work session. And then staff recommendations and next steps. And if time allows, we can look at performance trends. So at the last December 9th meeting, we covered the history and background of FLMM, particularly as it relates to the history and relationship to the IGA we currently have with jurisdictions. We also looked at how the FLMM Reserve Grant Program is funded and what it does, and looked at the current performance trends. Those have been updated in this slideshow. And again, if we have time, we can look at that at the end. Next slide, please. At the end of the work session on December 9th, 4 questions were presented and discussed at that meeting. Those questions were, should RAPTA continue with its current program of providing up to 50% funding for capital and operating for up to 3 years? If the board wishes to continue with that grant program, do we want to fund capital only, or do we want to continue to fund capital and operating requests? If the board does wish to fund operating requests, should RAPTA strictly adhere to those 3 years of funding at 50%, or should we have exceptions for going forward? And could there be an allocation of funding between RAPTA and the jurisdiction supported by FLMM use data? Priority topics identified guided the research for this meeting. We investigated local, federal, and state funding that jurisdictions or RAPTA could potentially apply for on behalf of jurisdictions. So looking at the grant, some of the grant funding opportunities, particularly the federal funding opportunities, we could look at how RAPTA could facilitate a grant like that, and then all of the jurisdictions that are interested could go in onto that grant. We also conducted a case study of the SALT as FLMM funding at the current 50% will be decreasing. We explored how funding would look from the future funding options that have been identified over the last several months and included a fifth option examined using microtransit trips to and from the trunk line as a metric for future funding possibility. And I'll go over what those options are again, just to remind everyone. Next slide, please. Also, at that December 9th work session, we identified that we want to continue providing the FLMM Reserve Grant Program. We prioritized in order bike share obligations, microtransit and bike share requests, infrastructure projects, and supporting data gathering. Next slide. So this is just a reminder. You've all seen this table in some past memos. This table outlines the years that each of the current microtransit FLMM grant recipients are eligible to apply for this funding based on the current guidelines. Note that Basalt will have a grace year, allowing extra time to explore outside funding options. We have conducted a case study to explore funding options and allocation of funds for the town of Basalt. It is in this grace year that we intend to formulate a plan to help the town of Basalt continue FLMM services. Next slide. So one of the things that we did for this meeting was just a little bit more deeply explore the funding opportunities that are out there. We explored several opportunities and distinguished between one-time opportunities. Others are multi-year and research opportunities, and then multi-tiered or planning and implementation phase opportunities. It is encouraged that institutional funding sources are sought out. However, institutional funding sources like designating tax revenue take strategic time and planning that we could be still years out from to really make that a robust option for our taxpayers. Therefore, seeking out grant funding is encouraged as short and midterm solutions. And then again, exploring the possibility of RAFTA facilitating one grant application on behalf of participating jurisdictions. This could be an option, particularly when applying to federal grants. And David Johnson will be here, I think around 9:30 to answer more questions about that. I feel like he might be the best person to answer questions about several of these grant opportunities. And just of note, I did explore National Science Foundation research grants, as well as the technology transfer program. Both of these are research grants that we could tap into that would allow jurisdictions to collect data, analyze that data, and then create the program that works best for their jurisdiction using that data under the premise of National Science Foundation guidelines. So some of these research grants could also be an option. Next slide, please. So looking at the town of Basalt as a case study, Basalt funding as it stands under the current FLMM guidelines will not continue with the 50% funding after 2025. So this is of concern because jurisdictions indicated that lack of funding could play a negative role in the future of FLMM in their communities. At the December 9th meeting, it was recommended to do a case study of Basalt in order to understand those different funding options presented at previous meetings. You can see that current conditions in Basalt indicate a steady increase in ridership of both microtransit and the use of bike share, as well as relative to connectivity to and from the RAFTA trunk line. And we have a little bit more information on that coming in a minute here. Next slide, please. Okay, so this chart is showing past and current costs of the basalt microtransit system. Each year following 2025 shows an assumed 5% increase in cost. We use the cost with an assumed 5% increase as our basis for understanding the basalt cost, basis for understanding basalt's cost of microtransit under the funding options presented at previous meetings. Next slide, please. So these are the options that visited in past meetings and that were developed I think several months ago. A was continuing the current seed funding program, which we know Basalt has exhausted that after 2025. Option B is to prioritize grant requests and reduce microtransit to 20% after 3 years. So again, what that means is that subsequent years, it would be 2026, 27, 28, and 29. Raft's cost would be 20% and Basalt's cost would be 80%. Option C is prioritize grant requests and taper microtransit at 10% per year after 3 years. So because Basalt gets the 4th grace year, that means that starting in 2026, Raft's cost drops to 40%, Basalt goes to 60%. Then in 27, Basalt will go to 70% cost. In 2028, 80%, and in 29, 90%. Option D is identifying alternative funding sources for ongoing operations. So that would be the grant funding that I've been alluding to during this meeting. And also keeping in mind that there can always be a combination of these options, that it's not just a one size fits all one option. And finally, option E is to use microtransit trips to and from Rafta trunk line as a metric. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, I didn't make the connection.
Yeah. And I have a few slides that are going to further explain it, but essentially what it would be is whatever the percentage of microtransit trips that are going to and from a bus, basically a bus station or a bus stop. We have a way where we can do a 3-year average of that percentage, and then that is the percentage that Raptor would
Just for my own information, why was the big jump in the cost between 23 and 24?
Scope of the, so.
You just expanded?
Yeah,
Got it.
basically times.
Yep, that's I just needed to get up to speed.
So it is important to note that this table shows the salt cost only through 2029. So I know that we've seen this chart in some of the past memo packets. And so what I did with this chart is instead of showing Rafta's cost, which is what we have been seeing in those past packets, I wanted to show Basalt's cost instead, since we're looking kind of more granularly at Basalt. So currently Rafta covers 50% of the cost of microtransit, which would mean that in 2022 through 2025, and you're seeing that in the white column of the chart, the FLMM reserve grant funds 50% of the system cost, while the jurisdiction funds the other 50%. Now, yes.
Are these representing the 50% or the total?
This is representing the total. So 2022 complete system cost was 380, 23 was 387. So 50% of that number would be what the salt cost was covering, and then 50% Rafta is currently covering. Option B, then, if you look at that column, shows the salt cost if Rafta covers 20% of the cost through 2029. So in 2026, that would be the salt total cost. 2027, that's the salt total cost. So that's not then showing the full amount. Option C, oh, and just to go back, to give kind of a numeric, equation for that, in 2026, the salt cost would be the 485,918, while Raptor's cost would be 122,018, so 122,000. Now, option C is showing Raptor's 10% paper per year, meaning that in 2026, the salt would cover 60%. So you're seeing the 60% that the salt would cover in 2026, the 60% in 70% in 27, 80% in 28, and then the 90% in 2029. And then option E, because option B is grant funding. So option E then is the percent of trips to and from microtransit using a 3-year average of those trips. And so now I'm going to get into like exactly what that means. I also have a math spreadsheet that I don't have as a slide, but if anybody needs it or wants it, I'm happy to send it and also show it at the end too. Next slide. Okay, so this is option E explained further. In 2022, 10% of riders went to and from a RAFTA trunk line, and you can see that in the column labeled 2022, and these are just for like microtransit trips to and from a RAFTA trunk line. That's all that this chart is representing. So total passengers in 2022 that went to and from a RAFTA trunk line were 1,947. That was 10% of their total riders. 2023, the total passengers going to and from a RAFTA trunk line is 3,259. And in 2024, the total number of passengers going to and from the trunk line was 6,694. So you can see a little bit of a jump there. If you average those 3 years, you get 14%. So if we were using this table for 2025, then the 3-year average of the percent of the salt connect to and from RAFTA stop would be 14%. And that's how much RAFTA would cover, and then the salt would cover the remaining 86%. So in order to kind of do the case study, I had to kind of look at anecdotal evidence because right now we don't have hard and fast data in our hands that shows what subsequent years might look like. So again, what I did was assumed a 5% increase in ridership to and from a RAFTA trunk line for 2025 and for 2026. So what that means is that it would kind of flatten out at about 28% of riders. And I kind of looked at anecdotal evidence based on what things look like in Aspen, because that line's kind of flattened out a little bit. And then also just understanding that given our region, that's probably where it would flatten out.
So one thing I was thinking about over the break or the holidays, with the park and ride stops themselves in the app. There are Willits and Salt Park and Ride are up Valley side, and I haven't really walked the Willits one as much, but the Salt downtown one, I mean, you use the Exxon, but you don't, if you're coming to or from the down valley, it's pretty much curbside to there. So I say that because I believe we're probably undercounting.
It's possible.
To a material degree, because it's, if you go to the other side, I mean, you're crossing the highway, you're going under, like people aren't doing that.
Okay.
They're going to the Exxon, it's like literally there's like a path, like 20-yard path right to the shed
Yeah.
from the Exxon parking lot, and
Okay.
it's like I mean, I can't imagine. And there's a we cycle on both sides.
Mhm.
So we know they're doing it with the we cycle.
Yeah.
So I just, for the modeling, I think we gotta think about that if we're gonna do some kind of attribution
Mhm.
based on, you know, stops that connect the trunk.
Yeah. So in other words, just so I'm hearing you correctly, looking at how infrastructure is affecting
Yeah.
where people are getting on and where they're getting off and making sure that the infrastructure is adequate at,
No, it's more like, I think people who use the Exxon are, that's commingled with the people going to the convenience store, but also a ton of rapid traffic. You
okay,
just wouldn't go get picked up on the other side.
yeah,
Doesn't make sense.
okay, okay,
You have to get off, walk, go under, and back up over to there, that parking lot. And there's a parking lot on the other side right there.
Yeah, I think the point is that we're gonna end with both bike share and microtransit. Just because the drop location is at a transit stop or transit center doesn't necessarily mean that's where they were going.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
and I would just add that it's not a perfect nexus, that unless we have, say, a ticketing system or something that goes straight from downtown or a recycle through transit all the way to their final, to the point where they leave transit or first last mile, we're not going to be able to make that a perfect one-to-one. So this is a way to utilize the data that we have to try to get that as close as possible.
Yeah.
We are moving into the triennial survey here coming up this year. We're looking to build in some questions to be able to get a better handle on what that transfer rate is. And we might be able to build that into this equation at some point, but we just don't have that data yet to really be able to say for sure and confidently put that into this model at this point.
No, I just think we're undercounting, and we could just simply with the app add a stop for Down Valley, and it'd be the same as the Exxon, but people would select it, and then you'd actually have the data.
On the downtowner?
Yes.
yeah,
Because there is no Down Valley stop, but there essentially is a physical place
Right.
at the Down Valley stop. That's the
Yeah, and
Exxon.
this has the way and correct me if I'm wrong here, Merrick, 'cause I know you've had a lot of conversations with them, but with Downtowner, it's a radius around each of the stops that they're
Yeah.
counting. So doesn't require a specific drop off right at that location, but within that immediate vicinity. I'm not sure exactly off the top of my head what that radius is.
I don't know
but,
either. off the top of my head.
there is a buffer there. So in that case, looking at Exxon, it's very close. It could very well be within that buffer already.
And we're also,
Kept being counted for.
Of
Yeah.
being counted for transit.
Okay.
yeah,
Okay, that's a method too. I mean, there's gonna be some assumptions in there.
yeah.
My point is that there's an undercount.
Yeah.
I bet a lot of money.
And it's interesting that you say that because we're also working with the downtowner. Craig Dubin is actually doing a lot of work to take some of the like raw data that they have and actually help kind of make sure that things are really like as they seem. So
Yeah.
in other words, we're trying to figure out if exactly what you're talking about is happening. If there's some maybe skewed data that we could, make a little bit more clear.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the app. You can code that in.
Yeah,
Figure out a use case to count it better and roll it out of the app.
yeah.
I think the bigger challenge is gonna be for the bike share. Because you take your bike to wherever the nearest station is, whether that's where you're really going or not. So
I think Tori has a question or comment. Go ahead, Tori.
Thank you. So while we're talking about this, and I know that we're looking at this just as a case study, but we do have this conversation around Basalt's microtransit. Are we saying that if this was the funding that was available from RAFTA, that the town of Basalt would be covering the remaining cost?
Yeah. So if we determine that the 3-year average, like the example up on the screen, the 3-year average of microtransit riders to and from a RAFTA trunk line is about
Right.
14%.
Right.
That cost would be RAFTA's cost. And
Right.
then the 86% would be on basalt.
If it was
Right, and
purely
so,
that.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm guessing that Basalt hasn't maybe had this internally as a conversation about their ability to fund that other side, or if they would or wouldn't. So I understand that this is just, you know, some data and we're talking through it, and I really appreciate it, but I was just wondering if, you know, if we are going to be making, if RAFTA is going to be making a decision about what level of funding is available for this, that conversation would need to include Basalt to know that it would still go on or work with reduced funding from RAFTA, correct?
Yeah, and sorry, it's David Knight, I'm here, and, if we did that method purely, it wouldn't work. Like, we don't have the money to fund that other
Right.
bit, so that's why I was saying, if we started using these, we'd have to use a combination, you know, including part of the town, honestly, trying to find grant sources on its own from that end as well. We'd have to cobble something together. There's no way we could do, that funding mechanism just by itself.
One
Got
other
it.
piece I wanted to throw out there too. We're talking about funding availability. In this case, it's still the FLMMR grant program. So it's still contingent on RAFTA having the funding available too. So this would be, what we're identifying here is the maximum amount of eligibility, not a guaranteed funding amount in any given year, the way
Understood.
it's established. Right?
All right, thank
All
you.
right. Next slide. So this is where I did the math. This chart shows Basalt average cost per month under all options, including the 4-year average cost per month. Note that average monthly cost differences are the greatest between options B and E, with E having the least expensive cost. Each option could have advantages and disadvantages, and then as we just identified, this could just be part of bigger plan of how to cobble together the fund.
Mary?
Yeah.
Clarify what
Yeah.
we're looking at. This would be what Basalt's paying?
This is what
Monthly.
Basalt would be paying monthly under the option. So system cost is the top line, and then option B would be 40,493 per month. So what you'll notice, and I have a nice graph to kind of explain this even a little bit more clearly, is that when you get into 2029, you can start noticing that monthly cost, for example, between option C, which is that 10% taper, versus option E. So there's a bit of a difference there, and that again is with those assumptions that I made, that ridership to and from RAFTA trunk line will increase about 10% from where they're at now by the end of 2026. So let's go to the next slide, and that is I like this graph because it really explains what's going on with cost. So the blue line is the cost of the program. That's the cost of microtransit. The yellow line is option E that we've been talking about. So that's going to actually have kind of a flatter look and then gradually increase beyond 2029, or even stay like kind of flat. Option C is the 10% taper per year, and you can see that even though it's a steeper curve, it kind of intersects with the other options eventually. And that goes the same for the orange line, which is option B, and that's that 20% after 2025. Next slide. So after going through the process of the case study, we started to realize that even though planning has not been considered as part of the FLMM reserve grant in the past, it should maybe now be considered. In order to fund microtransit in the future, plan for any infrastructure changes related to it, fund, target, and scale microtransit appropriately, making grant funding available for planning purposes could be considered. So that's one of the things that we're going to put out there to this group today. You know, can we consider that? Because a lot of the processes that we went through for the case study, we were like, wow, if there was funding available for the jurisdictions to plan for this appropriately, then it could also help transition into the jurisdiction having to take on a little bit more of that funding.
I just want to highlight this piece a little bit. I think it goes back to a lot of the conversation that, or in a lot of the points that have come up earlier around, you know, how are we going to fund this, what practice are, but doing it at a local time. So going through the micro-implementation so far, there's been a lot of, I think I've heard from the jurisdictions is we want the system to be specific and tailored to our jurisdiction. We don't want it to be some really one size fits all for each jurisdiction throughout the valley. So this is trying to take that into account and say, okay, we've got limited funding on the RAFTA side. We know the jurisdictions have limited funding. We know whatever funding goes into it needs to be utilized as efficiently and as effectively as possible while meeting the jurisdiction's goals. So this is, say, what if we utilize some of the FLMM funding that we have available now in the grant program and use that for those planning purposes? So for the jurisdictions to hire a consultant team or someone to come in and do a third-party analysis of the FLMM system within that jurisdiction, look at the funding that's available on the RAFTA side, on the jurisdiction side, and what options are available within that jurisdiction to make it, to tailor it to what the jurisdiction wants and to the resources that are available. So this is, as opposed to continually trying to just find more money to throw at the problem, trying to really make sure that the problems that we're trying to solve are clearly defined and the goals that we're trying to get to are achievable in line with the funding sources that we have. So I think that it looks like David's here. Do you want to chime in real quick on we talked a little bit about the use of this fund potentially for trying to scope out tax incentives or tax, not incentives, but efforts within local jurisdictions. And looking back at what was done with Destination 2040, I think that there might be some possibilities here. We're still in the discussion phase on this. So it's trying to figure out exactly what all the possibilities here might be. But I think that there is some real potential, at least from what I've seen so far.
Yeah, sure. You know, I look, when I think of planning these things, I think of a lot of different things, but one of, such as, you know, forecasting the growth of these systems and how we can best, you know, address the growth in personal last mile mobility ridership within the existing resources. But one of the things that keeps coming up for me, and certainly for everybody else, I think, is how do we fund this? And I think that I look back on Rapid Destination 2040 process, and we did a lot of planning with that. But one of the components of the planning we did was we did do some surveying on what types of local funding options might be palatable to people. And one of those, for instance, is property tax. And looking at that property tax, what level of property tax might be palatable to voters in a rapid service area. As it turns out that the sweet spot was 6.5 million people. General, or at least 50% of the electorate was comfortable with potentially comfortable with contributing 6.5 mils of property tax to RAPID to do these things. So then we ended up structuring our Destination 20 funding accordingly. For instance, we allocated $15 million to developing the regional transit center. And then anything else above that, we needed to come up with grant funding. As it turns out, we originally our cost for the regional transit center was about $50 million, and COVID happened, and now it's a lot more. But anyway, we did what we created our funding plan with what we could with that 6.5 mils of property tax. So maybe, for instance, if a jurisdiction wanted to say, all right, I want to poll voters in my jurisdiction about, how much maybe field tax or other local tax that might be palatable for them. And then look at the funding of of an FLMM. Whether it's like a county or something. So that was an idea that I was thinking for the planning, but
David, did you mean to say 2.65 mil? You keep saying 6.
6.5, I'm sorry, yes.
I was like, that's a lot of.
Seems like
You have the,
Yeah.
Thank you. No, we authorized 6.5. No, I'm sorry. I don't know, I came up with, you are correct. What is it?
2.65.
2.65.
So one thing just to point out, you were mentioning the tailoring it to the jurisdictions, that I think kind of baked into that assumption is that it wouldn't be then like Holland Hills outside, like unincorporated county space.
I think
Unless
there's
that was
still,
like a fourth, like
right.
jurisdiction, so to speak.
I think there's still potential for that in cases like that where you're starting to face a municipality into county. I think that's going to require partnership between the county and the jurisdiction to move forward with that. So I think that's actually a good instance where the planning effort can be helpful to help really suss that out. How does the jurisdiction want to, or does the municipality want to move into the county? What's the county's interest in partnering in that? So really taking a deeper dive into what those relationships are and what the interests are is, and what the demand might be relative to the cost moving forward in a direction like that. So I see this really helping in that direction.
So bolting it, if I play it back, kind of bolting those areas on case by case with relationships between the municipality and the county.
Right.
Yeah.
So it really requires that coordination at that point.
If I could too, we've presented 5 options. And at the beginning of the subcommittee, we identified what's the goal. And one is what's RAPTA's role in this? And then particularly as it relates to funding. So one option that hasn't been discussed is that RAPTA dissolve it, right? And obviously that would require new funding to be able to facilitate that. So we've kind of talked about cost sharing scenarios with different methods. But one scenario could be, and I throw this out there because it all depends on how this funding's collected. So in these shared scenarios, there's the local jurisdictions are maybe the ones responsible for creating a new funding source. There could be a scenario though where RAPTA is the one that has created the new funding source. And instead of just passing or sharing, it just becomes a service of RAPTA. So I know that's sort of on the extreme end, kind of showed some scenarios of where it's on the other side of the spectrum, but I just wanted to put that out there that that's on the table as well. I don't want it to appear that we're not proposing that as a scenario.
Kurt, I appreciate you mentioning that. I mean, I think especially when
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, and when it comes to stuff like this, like I think there's a little bit of a push and pull here between each jurisdiction to some degree needs to tailor its own program, but at the same time, we're small municipalities sitting around the table with limited staff and limited expertise in this. We have this amazing regional transit agency with all its expertise in-house. So like, rather than Basalt and Carbondale and Glenwood and everybody going out and finding their own consultant and running their own studies and doing their own process, I'd much rather think this kind of stuff centralized and RAPTA being coordinating that kind of planning, and whether that's sort of an in-kind support or we're contributing in some, whatever it is. But I would just note that I don't want to speak fully for my jurisdiction right now, but my personal perspective on it would be, I would trade off customization and localization for regional support and offloading some of the responsibility for planning and figuring it out. You know what I mean? If we can't really have it both.
That's how I feel personally too. And all, just because we don't have we don't have a transportation director. We don't have that in Basalt. I don't know what you
We
guys
don't even
have.
know. We don't have. a
Yeah, like we're not.
Yeah.
So,
I would have to assume there's some savings and efficiency there too, if it were under one heading rather than each of us trying to kind of do it ourselves.
I also think of the convenience for any rider. You know,
Right.
that they can get on a raft bus somewhere and they don't have to think about all the various other differently named, differently branded things to get on. So I'm all in favor of pursuing that.
It's
Throw
like
out there, just to throw out there also, we've got timeframe perspectives also. So these are things that we can put in place right now. We can do this immediately.
Yeah.
In terms of RAFT being able to take over, we're looking several years out. So
We need the funding.
we would need the funding. We can only go out to, we would have to use some of our tax, our ability to tax. And that can't happen until 27 at this point, unless 25 and 27 is my understanding. I'm gonna guess we're not gonna make it for 25. So by the time we would be able to go out would be 27, start collecting funds. To do that every odd year. So 25 and 27 we could go out.
Okay.
Assuming that's correct. We'd be looking at 27, probably start collecting 28. So we'd be several years out. So we still have this gap time.
Well,
That we would
27
need to figure out.
the soonest we would have any data to share probably anyway, so.
Got a question. I see paid parking up there. Carbondale, Basalt, have you ever explored paid parking in just, Midland or Main Street, or never come up? Because, I mean, it's one way to discourage people from driving, right? Which is what we're all in here to get people out of their single occupant vehicles. It's really the most effective tool. City of Aspen funds everything that way. So just throwing it out there, we're looking at it. Obviously had a lot of pushback from certain businesses and stuff downtown, but everything I've explored, it's like you get that pushback initially, but it's actually a funding source, and it's a way to keep people from, or make them think about, hey, I'm driving to Aspen, am I going to take the bus or should I take a car and pay? So,
this year, we're going to be rolling out an enforcement program for time parking that we already have.
Okay.
Books. It hasn't been enforced in I don't know how long. We got the change to parallel parking. We're gonna get a subscription service.
Okay.
So they, drive around, scan license plates, that kind of thing, and it's probably gonna be, 2 hours flat. There's been talk about changing it, like to kind of drive people to park here if you're gonna be there for longer for like a shift versus stopping in. But I think going to paid
Sure.
same time as that is a bridge too far. And I don't even think, I doubt there's appetite to be perfectly candid with you.
Sure.
No, but I hear you,
Yeah.
especially for.
Well, that's where we're at, is we are getting that enforcement stage to make sure we can just enforce what we have on the book. And then we hope to step it up at some point. Whether it's dynamic parking pricing, I mean, there's all kinds of different schemes you can do. And it's just, again, it's another way to get some kind of revenue out of it, which is really how Aspen funds a lot.
Yeah.
I think paid parking is definitely one of our best levers to get people out of cars. Having been the parking manager in Fort Collins, it's tricky because you got to kind of go all in, right? As Aspen has done, because you can't just price pockets, because you just push that parking
Yep.
into the neighborhood or to the adjacent.
Yeah.
You got to have whatever you're going to price. You also then got to likely have residential permit programs in the adjacent areas to control the spillover effect that happens, and then it just keeps growing.
Mhm.
David?
I was just thinking, being, living here in Carbondale for 10+ years, I think the other component of instituting like a parking program like this is there really has to be a problem to solve. And I do see it happening in Carbondale, but not quite to the point where it could be justified. In my opinion, I mean, my parking problems I see are, for instance, on the weekend at the Village Smithy or, here and there, it's pockets. And if you've instituted something and you wanted to generate revenue from it, it's probably, probably wouldn't be worth the eggs being thrown at Ben.
Yeah, I'd say we're away. We don't have enough of a problem. Let's keep moving ahead though, because I feel like we've edited out really well on this one concept of Raps's potential role or the municipal role in planning, but let's keep going. I think we've got a lot to cover.
Okay, so another topic that was brought up at the last meeting was the consideration of a unified transportation app. And so looking at the strategic plan, we can see that a unified transportation app would support the language that we've already put in place, leveraging technology to enhance customer experience. Particularly, I did a very minute amount of research on this and looked at 3 different unified transportation apps. Washington State Department of Transportation is providing it looks like a pretty user-friendly transportation app. Milwaukee, Wisconsin has Wisco, which is powered by UMO, and that's another transportation app that seems relatively user-friendly. And then the middle one there is the transit app, which is already in use here in our region. Next slide, please. So several advantages to a unified transportation app, rider experience, trip planning, payment, tapping into a third party to create the interface. One of the things that I was thinking about is also advantageous is that it can really elevate, what we're doing at RAPTA, and as we explore that option and make it as user-friendly as possible, whomever it might, end up being with. And then the Downtowner is collaborating with Transit App, and they're integrating via ZPlink. So it's basically a link embedded that will allow users to schedule and plan their trip, in addition to WeCycle already being part of the Transit App. And is there anyone here that's unfamiliar with that particular app, the Transit App? I just wanted to ask, since that's the one that I'm most familiar with.
But that's great that there's already an integration between the two, because the transit app is great. One that we said the plus for a lot of different things. The Downtowner app is great too. And if you wanted to get a unified one, I mean, like having something where there was integration already like done, so we weren't having to develop that was good.
I've never explored the beyond the paywall in the transit app. Is there still a paywall? I don't, sometimes they want more money. They want money to tell you something you'd like to know.
There's a paywall, it's called Royale.
Right.
So you can become a Royale member individually. But if you go actually download the app, say in Snowmass because Snowmass is part of the Royale, so they pay a subscription to transit. So does RTD. I'm not sure about CDOT off the top of my head, but certainly if you go download it, say in Denver, you'll also become a member of Royale. And there's some notable benefits, particularly at very busy stops like Ruby Park on the transit side, to be able to see all of the lines that currently aren't available. So we don't currently contribute anything to the transit app. It's there. It's a free app for anyone to use, but it does have limited functionality because we're not paying that membership fee.
I would love if we could consider either participating or getting rid of that paywall somehow. Only because there are times when you really would like to know it, but I'm too parsimonious to actually give them money.
And we have looked into it. I think Mary's going to talk about that here and now.
I'm not familiar with that app at all.
I have the
Oh,
Rapid app. but
Transit app.
Yeah, I don't know
Um,
what you're talking about.
It's actually really widely used. I was looking in my research trying to find some other options because I think that no matter what, we kind of want to go through a procurement process before something. And I discovered that almost every city that I typed in my search engine for transportation app, transit app came up. So it's quite widely used. On the next slide, so this is just again, example because this is what I know. Because RAPTA is already involved in the transit app. They have the ability to get monthly active unique transit app users. And so looking at how we're in this room discussing this and recognizing that use has increased, I think it was, I put it in the memo, it's something like 420% or something since 2018. So just looking at how people are really looking towards these unified apps to help them plan and schedule their travel.
How do you guys capture that?
They capture it.
Yeah, they capture, we've had conversations with Transit App and they've provided us some, I guess, beta look into the dashboard and the information that we could receive if we started paying, and this is part of that data that we could receive. So they provided this to us just as, this is what you could.
I got an idea, but
How do you extrapolate to the percent of the total users of the bus system or on transit app?
We need to just look at monthly boardings.
Well, let's say December, our December boarding system wide was, I want to say 580,000. But these are, of those are repeat users over the course of the month. So this is unique users.
and outside the scope of this FLMM discussion, but I mean, is there like ever been discussion about driving people to use transit app and using something like that kind of ecosystem to sell the path, to do all of it? And if there's that kind of pickup that people generally use it everywhere.
We have had those conversations with our backup, so our backend Masabi payment system.
Yeah.
And they can integrate into Masabi or into Transit App, sorry. So Transit App is really just that customer, what the customer sees.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot happening behind the wall here. And Masabi would be part of that, for customers to be able to pay. So that's like RTD being part of it. Actually, now that I think about it, CDOT must be part of it because you can purchase Mustang tickets through Transit App. You can purchase RTD tickets through Transit App. And you have to at least be a Royale member in order to start integrating to that level. But all of that costs extra, and it's an annual cost to be able to do that.
Just a quick question. So, Recycle already uses the transit. That's how you get a good bike.
Yeah.
Do you think that how do you do that? Program of the cost?
In terms of, yeah, so we actually, back in 2015, we made it that first bike share, integrated bike share app to be able to relate bike using their services, and at the same time, integrated rapid API into it. So we created a cohesive ecosystem from the get-go. And then since then, we pay them on an annual basis to be able to do our bike checkout. The majority of our bike checkout to take place in the app. And then we get a monthly report as to how many bikes were checked out, the user practice. And then what that allows is that in one moment, if someone's on the bus getting to a station, they can see what bikes are available and how many docking points. And if they're arriving to return their bike, they can immediately see which buses are live feeder up to now.
That's cool.
So if I can,
We find from a multimodal, and we're trying to exercise. The more we try our goal, what I continue to hear in this conversation is to reduce friction. We want to be able to get as many people using our service as possible, the best service at the right time. And in order to do that, you need something where all the options are in one place. You can pick your options. So I'm a huge proponent of how we can move towards an integrated app, what that means.
so we've been on Transit App since 2015. But But since we weren't facilitating the fare purchases, we weren't required to have to pay anything. We were just utilizing the free service, people being able to get the rider information. Then in 2020, when we, or 2021, when we implemented Masabi, that then is how our fare payments were being facilitated. So we have asked for quotes to be able to integrate Masabi into the transit app so that there's not two apps competing. So there's a way to do it. And it probably would require upgrading to the Royale membership. And so there's a path. I think the next piece though is how do we integrate then the microtransit element into that as well?
Yeah. That's what I threw out. You're talking about possibly instituting paid parking and seeing that in the future. I'm wondering if a paid parking is part of that as well. So it's all there. As you pull in and you want to get on the bus, parking your car and it's all right there, maybe one account, maybe then it's worth having a Royale account.
Right.
If that's all you need to be able to move through the system.
Especially if we service both residents and visitors. And if you're coming from another community and you're already familiar with something like this, I can just make it seamless.
Exactly. Tell all visitors to, put $20 into the system and get this really easy. Keep their money after they do too.
And it's not terribly expensive. I
Yeah.
think it was like 20 or 30,000 annually for the Royale.
And you'd be saving that if eventually the wrap that wasn't very.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
So just on the Royale piece, the Royale piece is not terribly expensive. The integration with Masabi is an added cost. That's multiple times the cost of Masabi,
Okay.
or of the Royale.
One timer license for both.
I'd have to go back and recall.
It'd probably be both.
Yeah, there is a certain amount of recurring, but I don't remember how extensive recurring is. On the microtransit side, just as a reminder, this spring we will be deep linking, or Downtowner will be deep linking into the transit app. So what that means is that it won't be a full integration like you see with WeCycle, but it will come up as the list of options. We see you're in Carbondale, microtransit's available here. You can click on the Downtowner and it'll take you right to their app. So it still takes you over their app, so it's not a complete integration, but it will be part of that transit app and the list of options available.
I'm hearing support for the concept of an integrated app from the board and the staff member conversation. I feel like that's our goal for today, right? We choose apps. So let's keep going.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right, next slide. So speaking of integrating things, another thing that we talked about at the last meeting was creating an integrated transportation map. And several members requested that a map be considered that might show more than just RASTA fixed lines, but that could also integrate multiple layers such as the fixed lines, microtransit, and bike share. So staff met with Farnsworth Group in the last couple of weeks to determine an action plan for creating a digital interactive web-based map that could be linked or used as an app eventually. And that could also possibly eventually be created as a stationary kiosk. So for now, we're just looking at what would this integrated interactive digital map look like, something that we could test internally, that the board could test and staff could take a deeper look at and be available potentially as a web, on the web, and then move into like an app situation or onto an app. In the 2 meetings that we've had with Farnsworth Group, we have determined that using existing digital resources, including myrafta.com, WeCycle's existing docking map, the Downtowner's existing service area map, and then also existing paratransit, Rio Grande, and busing information that we already have, that's already available to RAFTA, would be an efficient and cost-effective way to start that process.
I would just say, it's, I mean, the content's gonna all be bespoke, like the maps and everything, but as much off the shelf app is possible, is better versus developing something unique.
Yeah,
But I mean, you're gonna have to, I mean, I don't know, kiosks, I have no idea what people do for that and, but just, you know, just kind of your PCs and apps. But I also think mobile would get picked up quicker than doing it online. I think I think you gotta be mobile first, or at least mobile at the same time.
I'm looking at the transit app, which does show the bike share and the routes. It doesn't show the bus stops. Can tell, but maybe a way to work with transit app as a solution too.
I think that there is. Next slide. So this next slide is an actual screenshot that I took of an integrated transportation map. It's a sample that Farnsworth Group has been working on. And again, what they did, this is, by the way, from Miami-Dade in Florida. So it's a lot busier than what ours might look like here. That link is interactive and should work if you want to click on it.
Oh.
Demo.
Yeah, and I can walk you through it once we get to it.
I think I have to now.
I mean, I'm just thinking about time for today.
Yeah. And
We're
I can,
past, like, I don't know that we need to go that GTD. This was sort of an idea of like, oh yeah, we need to integrate all this. We need to integrate in the app. We need to integrate mapping. I don't know if anybody feels like we need to go deeper than that for today. I don't.
okay. And I can share this link. It's going to be active for a period of time specifically so that we could explore it.
Okay.
But I can share the link with very short directions. It's really easy to use. So I'll do that.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. So, this is kind of the conclusion, but, we have 5 key points that we've kind of gone over during this meeting. And, we have a recommended direction, and this can be up for discussion. But the first is to allow the long-term FLMM operations funding based on previous 3-year average, based on connections to and from raft of fixed routes. So that was that piece in the basalt connect and counter basalt case study. Add an FLMM grant funding category for analysis and planning to help jurisdictions with that and moving forward even as a regional effort. Staff will continue to research future long-term funding solutions or regional combined grant opportunities. Conduct competitive bid process to help identify a unified transit and FLMM app, and then establish the map that I just talked about. Next slide. I think that it looks the thank you slide. We can keep it on that one, that previous one. So.
And it feels like, do we need to sort of talk through these and get, these are staff recommendations and get board input on these, or were there other items that staff thought we needed to talk through?
I think these were the highlights
Yeah.
that we had in mind. One point that I would touch on before you get into that conversation is the research future long-term funding solutions, that component there. That's the bucket where if there was a desire for a more regional scale and funding and effort, that's where that falls. So we, at least from my perspective, view that as a longer term solution, not something that we can pull down and make the perfect solution this year.
Well, I think it could be viewed as maybe phases or steps, that this is what we do for the next 2-3 years until we can maybe go a different route, if that's what is of interest to the board.
I'd be interested in that, but I think to go along with that, like kind of a roadmap, you know, not just like the funding part, but like what are we trying to accomplish vis-a-vis the funding? Or with the funding.
Yeah.
Could we just take these one at a time and discuss them then and give time for that?
Yeah.
I feel like that would be, I think, let's start with the top one, which is, that's a pretty big step, right? From the last time that this was presented to the board, there were those options of stepping it down and, you know, various things. And I don't think we had this on those options.
I would say this isn't far off from what you saw, actually. So in terms of the 20%, that was more or less picking what we thought might be a more or less industry standard of connection to trunk line. This is utilizing data from each jurisdiction to determine that year to year. So looking back the previous 3 years to determine what the next year of eligible funding might be. So if a jurisdiction does want to take specific steps to really increase those connections to trunk line service, then they would be eligible for greater amounts of RAPTA funding.
That included, that was sharpening the pencil with the jurisdiction to figure out more to kind of bump up the
Right.
funding would be.
Yeah, because from our perspective, the goal is to get people to trunk line service. This is a way to try to incentivize that.
So David, is this really specific to microtransit? Since the bike share piece is sort of part of the MOA, SOA
Yeah,
agreements.
bike share is separate.
So this is specifically microtransit.
This is, the way it's worded right now is operations for other options getting to trunk line service other than bike share. But right now, microtrans is the only one that's on the horizon. So that's the only one that's
And
really
I
impacted.
think at our previous meeting, I heard from this committee that prioritizing those efforts over community capital projects was of desire. So it really does kind of narrow this down to just pretty much microtransit.
In terms of the funding that we have available, it would be bike share as first priority, and then microtransit as second priority, then anything else after that. If we do want to go forward with planning, I would suggest that we put planning in after we're funding those operational pieces with microtransit. And then anything left over would be infrastructure. So for all intents and purposes, I wouldn't expect there to be any infrastructure funding available going down this road.
So I'd love to hear from other board members. I mean, to me, there's two questions kind of embedded in that first proposition. And one is, where are we going to find the recurring funds within RAPTA? Because we know that this First Last Mile Mobility Fund, you know, grant fund was set up as kind of one time, and it's being spent down. And then the other is that available to all, or is that sort of a need-based thing? I mean, I think that's the trickiest part of this whole conversation. But we, I think, did a good job talking about that pretty openly last time, where, you know, that's been getting funding for
Right.
microtransit now, right? And municipalities are going to essentially afford to pay for it themselves. Is this a need-based thing, or is this a equal opportunity for everybody thing? And I think it's really important that we're able to have that conversation because, yeah, I mean, that's always been a tricky part of what's RAPTA's role in beyond the trunk line, because we know that like a resort community has very different needs for moving people all around town on shuttles and stuff like that, and with SKICO and all that, than the down valley communities do. And we have very different sized budgets and different abilities to pay for this kind of stuff. So I'd love to hear thoughts on those questions, I think, that are underneath. If we're saying, okay, we're going to commit to RAPTA's responsibility is paying for the transit to and from the RAPTA stops, essentially the microtransit, is that for everybody, or is that based on need? And how are we going to do that term when the FLMM grant temporary funding runs out? Right. You guys, yeah.
Side, anything for
Um,
microtransit.
I like
Have
that
we not
approach. I
like
think it's a nice balance between what we talked about
Okay, she said.
writing it down and recognize the critical role that microtransit plays in getting people to DRT stops. I also think her suggestion for the last meeting, and I think this is a real important service that drives ridership to the regional line. There's a lot of people who take transit, get in Carbondale, and now they have options. And bike share is great, but it's not on any bike today. And our current circulator only goes into downtown. And it's something up there that might also be useful, and maybe this is part of this discussion around planning, is that Carbondale has a service that we have to provide. And how do we balance that with the microtransit? And do they need to be rethought or are they standalone? I mean, 10,000 people get on the circulator, both be away. Now, the ridership has dropped a little bit. I don't see how that's changed since July when we put the downtowner in. But one of the challenges has always been the bulk of our population actually lives outside high school, south of the roundabout. But we don't provide transit out there. We do now with downtown. So RAPTA would be better to help us with figuring some of that stuff out than us trying to get a third party to do it. And also the equity thing, Glenwood and the Upper Valley have extra sales tax that they've already approved. We went into RAPTA for the big picture of transit in general. I don't know how realistic it is for Aspen Basalt or Carbondale to go for extra transit tax just us. Given that we already put in sales tax, property tax, to RAPTA, I'm not saying it's not possible, but that's a dynamic that's really challenging. I think in some of the smaller communities that are never going to have the sales tax base that Glenwood and Aspen have, let alone Newcastle. So I like the direction we're going, but I really mind because I think RAPTA, I know the funding is there, and that's why we want to talk about this, but that's the key question. But RAPTA is the transit authority, transportation authority, and that's, I think, our biggest, that we have the biggest impact on achieving our climate goals, our transportation goals, if RAPTA is working on stuff, and we're helping, as opposed to we all have to do it.
Thanks, Colin. Sorry, I saw that you unmuted. Did you want to jump in?
Well, I was just gonna give any input that I could here. And I apologize for not being there in person. And it's a little difficult to hear some of the in-room conversation, but for me, I like the data that just came forward. The first point on staff recommendations here is I appreciate it and it makes sense to me, but it seems very specific to the Basalt Connect. So I'm not sure other operations like that would fall into this category. Maybe Carbondale circulator. I don't know, but I also would wonder. I'm just wondering about the efficacy. Is it working? And I guess from that I mean the Basalt Connect is moving folks, I believe, primarily across the highway, Willits, Basalt, and around. Has it been a benefit? I know that it helps some, but are we seeing the numbers there that that Basalt is happy with? And I just don't know that kind of information about what that line in particular, what its success is. As far as the other items here, I can see how the FLML grants for community planning would be helpful, and I would turn mostly to Carbondale and Basalt talking about that, but I can see how that would be very helpful. Obviously, continue researching future long-term funding solutions. The unified app, as well as the map. The reason that I was interested in seeing a map and seeing this laid out is to know where we're missing and what populations and areas, geographic populations, would be better served by some FLMM services. So that was really why I was interested in that map. But I love the direction that this is going, and obviously a digital platform that is easy to share would be great. And that way everybody would have the same information. Overall, I thank you so much. I so appreciate, again, Ben and Colin in the room. I think that they have a really great perspective on a lot of this. So, I'm really interested in their input and following their lead on a lot of this stuff, because I think they have a really good insight to it. So that's all I've really got right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jordan. Other thoughts, I mean, maybe sticking with the first one for a moment, so we kind of really think that all the way through, and especially, I think those two questions, like, it's based on need or budget size or some other metric, or is it sort of available to all member jurisdictions equally? And any thoughts on RAPT's long-term funding strategy? If RAPT is gonna, we as RAPTA, if we're gonna commit to that, then it's gotta be something beyond the current fund.
Mary, based on that case study of
Mhm.
basalt, what was the percent breakdown again for trips to and from RAFTA?
Year one, 2023 was, or 2022 was 10%. 2023 was 12%, and then 18.9% for 2024.
Yeah.
And we anticipated that the number would go up 5% in 2025. So we have to kind of wait and see. And then another 5% in 2026. And then it would flat.
So that 3-year average though is
14% for that, for those first three. What happened was when I did the math, it went from 14% in my math.
And it came out, that's for easy numbers, it came out around 20%.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it
we're
went
looking at the,
Yeah,
like 20%.
18%, 23%, and then 28% was where it flat.
So under this recommendation, RAFTA would be contributing 20% to basalt's microtransit.
Correct
And then the 80% would be,
on them. But if it goes up that 5%, then RAFTA would essentially be contributing 28%.
And that's just in isolation with that funding mechanism. That doesn't include other funding mechanisms that we could explore.
Right.
And some of those, I think we should do them together because like trips to the grocery store, do we want to be charged? You know, there's a lot of use cases around that we probably all should think about together. So in addition to this one part of it.
so is there a transition though to this recommendation? Because I think if next year we said basalt, you're on the hook for 80%, it's probably not gonna happen.
It's not,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
we'd have to look at
Yeah.
a more holistic
Right.
way, because that's just not gonna
I
come.
think there's an opportunity here to even combine some of these options.
Yeah,
Where you take the taper down to,
A certain year.
to a, well, even to, until it hits, whatever the 3-year average
Yeah.
is. So it drops, say, 10% per year until it hits 20%,
yeah,
something like that. So then it's not just, here you go, done.
like a cliff.
Yeah.
We're trying to avoid the cliff. Yeah, and to Tori's point, you know, we are happy with the service and what it provides. We have seen growth as we have added time and additional season time. We've seen the uptake of the service continue, and you know, we want to see as far as going forward, where we're at now at 18, 9, 19, 20%, whatever it is, increase. And I think my hunch is that with some fine tuning of the stops and everything, we'd see that just off the bat, but I think we could see more with more integration of the apps and for transit and things like that. So
And just one comment from Tori, and it's stirred this thought. I kind of goes down to the second part here, but something that we've seen is that we don't really have consistent goals amongst each of the jurisdictions for implementing microtransit. So from what I understand, Aspen implemented it to try to reduce parking demand downtown. Basalt implemented it to try to really connect the Willits to downtown Basalt. So we've got these different goals from different jurisdictions for the purposes and why they're out there. And then RAFTA, we've got our goal of getting people to the trunk line. So part of where we were trying to get with this planning analysis and why we were thinking a jurisdiction level might work the best is because each jurisdiction has these specific goals that really need to be fleshed out at that jurisdictional level. And so I think, again, I don't know that this is not there to solve all problems, but to really identify that we're coming at this from different angles. And RAFTA's angle and what we're talking about with the first option here is really trying to incentivize and get people that trunk line service.
and I think our angles aren't gonna be that different.
No.
I mean, I think 80-90% are the same.
Not different, but the geography of communities, so there's
Yeah.
3 parking lots now. between Elgin and Gulf. Because Elgin will,
Yeah.
Carbondale is one.
Right. And
We have an internal circular that goes downtown to the parking. So it changes the dynamic of what we're trying to do, that we kind of need Raptor's perspective on understanding.
Yeah.
What are the options? Like, if we changed our circulator, would that reduce the demand on the downtown or vice versa? We don't know.
That's exactly what we're trying to get at with this. And,
But I
and
think
when I
we
say,
need you guys
and-
to do that, because we don't have transportation.
and I don't mean to make it sound like we would just step back and be like, let me know what you come up with.
Yeah.
No, we would be heavily engaged the whole time. But in terms of the really setting the scope of the work and the goals of the work, at least from, and again, this is just out there for conversation. From my perspective, because each jurisdiction seems to be coming at it from a different angle, it seemed to make sense that the jurisdiction should be setting that scope of work to really define what that end goal is.
I think we would respond really well though in the jurisdiction to like a RAPTA-led planning effort that says, okay, RAPTA's coming to help with planning your first last mile mobility. RAPTA's goal is this, trunk line access. What are your other goals as a municipality or county jurisdiction? Let's add those to the mix and then let's do some planning together.
Yeah. I think what we're saying is we'd have access to the FLMM pot of funds, conduct that if we needed outside
Yeah.
sources.
Okay, I'd love to hear from Aaron, from Greg, from
Well,
anybody else on, especially again, back to number one. I think that the biggest challenge here is we're talking about meeting that goal of RAPTA paying the share of rides to and from the parking rides essentially. Is that for everybody or is that need based? And is that what are our ideas on long-term sustainability?
I have a really hard time contributing to this conversation just because we haven't even begun to like define our program yet. My biggest concern is that we drain funding before everybody can start to, figure out what works for them. And so I think it's a fine balance of preserving. So, probably something that is a little more need-based is the more responsible way to look at it. To just try and make sure that those funds are available while we all figure out, because transportation and congestion and all of that is not simplifying anytime soon. So we got to look for long-term sustainability.
Greg, any thoughts?
I like where it's going. I'm thinking that RAPTA we have to realize at this point, I'm sure we all do this, can't be everything to everyone. And there's certain areas where it's going to be easier to operate and easier to collect funding. Other places, I just I don't see how RAPTA is going to be able to go everywhere we'd like to go without finding other funding sources. So I skipped to the green one. The green one sticks out for me. And long-term funding, I keep thinking, what can we offer sponsors? What can we offer for sponsorships? Say a company would like to offset its carbon, what can we tell them about taking drivers off the road and could they legitimately have a carbon offset or something like this? I'm trying to think of where could that money come from and who would be willing to put money in, sort of just putting a billboard on the side of the product. Are there other ways that we could look for funding to help make these things work, both in the communities themselves, maybe in the various communities could have, different funding streams that way through sponsorship. I also keep thinking that we do have commercial rideshare companies that are trying to be part of this somehow, part of the transportation mix. We've got that new co-op. I think I brought it up at the last meeting. I don't know if anybody looked into it, but they're trying to grow in the valley and in the state. And if we're not integrating them, I think we're making a mistake because one, people can pay for their ride. It's not like everybody needs to have a ride for free, and some people will be willing to. They can get them there faster than maybe when you pay a premium. And I'm just wondering if we're not contemplating that, we may be missing out.
It's so complicated. I can't, I better shut up now, but, I mean, anything else to add? But I realized the complexity and how the situation's different for every one of our communities. But I'm very enthusiastic about it. I can share that, and I would go out and if I knew what it cost and what we could sell and offset, I'd be out trying to blog those sponsors already. Greg, that was what I think.
A quick question, Chris, do we know, that with all this money, and I think it was federal money for free rides, free, pay, lower the cost for training. Now, I know RAPTA did not go after that money because trying to meet that demand would be significant. Is that money still available and can be applied to some of the local services that were operating?
It was actually state funding, I believe. And there was a bill that was passed to make this available. My understanding of it, and Dave might have more information, is that it's limited in scope. It's not an ongoing source of funding. It was really to kind of pilot and to help. A lot of the transit agencies across the state hasn't been as fortunate as RAFTA in terms of regaining their ridership. So that was an effort to help regain that ridership, but it could for a pilot.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do. It's all, the clock's ticking. We've got another year. Glenwood's gonna be starting. And we're trying to figure out how do we fund this? How do we, in 3 years, figure out how can we keep getting some money in there to keep it going?
Well, if I may, I think the elephant in the room is, we're talking about these various scenarios that are based on jurisdictions coming up with a share of funding. And I think though the big question is what is the reality of all jurisdictions to be able to come up with that share of funding? And there are some jurisdictions that may be able to do it, like Aspen and Glenwood, but we have the Mid-Valley, we have the Newcastles that, would have a really hard time probably finding a source of revenue to come up with 80% or even maybe 50% on an ongoing basis. But that kind of harkens back to the success of RAFTA, is that RAFTA on a regional scale has benefited from everybody contributes to the pot, and that pot then provides a sort of level of service throughout the entire region that isn't based on, oh, well, Aspen and Pickens County contributed this much, so they're going to get 80% of all that service, and then the other jurisdictions only get a little bit. The benefit that the region has seen and all the members have seen is that it benefits to share those resources. And I'm thinking that might need to be the conversation in this regard as well. If we do want sort of an equal level of access to the RAFTA trunk line from all the member jurisdictions, that there needs to be a solution that puts the funding in a pot that can be shared. And I think that then means it's probably not each jurisdiction trying to find those funds. It's something done on a more regional scale. And that probably means RAFTA. So I think that's really, it's kind of hard to see this recommendation working if the Mid-Valleys and Newcastles are having to find that funding on their own.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Kurt. I mean, I think you're right. That's the reality. I also think though that, taking off my town Carbondale hat and just thinking strictly, if my only interest in this was as a board member of RAFTA, RAFTA does need to keep its scope focused on probably regional service. And so I do think that like the historical precedent of if you want within your municipality, like Glenwood and all the shuttles in Aspen and Pickens County, if you want to be able to move people around internally, that's kind of up to you. But if you want to get into the trunk line, that's kind of up to RAFTA. I think that basic like delineation still makes sense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I do think, sorry, I do think that if we have these local solutions really highly functioning and integrated with an app that's user friendly, it would increase ridership along the whole entire trunk line of RAFTA. So I do think that it would have a synergy. That's just an assumption, but I know I personally, it would be a lot easier if I could just like knew that I could leave my house. Right now, I have to drive wherever I go if I'm going to get a bus. So like that literal, the whole impetus for this program, that first step is, I think, going to do it. And so I think having it be more holistic really does make sense for the long term. But I think getting everything up and going has to be local because we all know what our communities are looking for. So, probably that more regional thing is down the road a little bit.
I guess if that's the model, then the scope of the services of microtransit might need to change, right? That is more focused on your destination is a RAFTA stop. Those are the options, right? You can't take the microtransit to the city market, or I guess city market would probably be a transit stop in Carbondale, but you know what I mean? The system would get designed in a way to where you're kind of, and the stop location that you can take the microtransit to, say, is a transit stop, but people are like, well, I'm taking it to that stop because that's my only option, but I'm actually going to go over here to the library.
You actually want
Right.
to do that.
Right.
But what it implies is that there has to be some funding source that covers that on behalf of the community when it's not directly to RAFTA. I appreciate where you're going. But the thing is, we're all talking about modern planning is development around transit stops. I was thinking about the thing that vexes me in Benton County right now. So we're hurtling toward putting a development that's 10 miles to the nearest grocery store and 10 miles to the nearest school, then Phillips Curves, which is lower upper valley. And it's never made sense to me because it's just so far and it doesn't have regular service. Like it has, maybe it is an hourly route to shuttle that goes through, but I'm not even sure. Because the additional cost that the community is going to have to bear, we're going to have to bear. We want RAP to really serve us. I think we estimated that at $600 to $1 million a year for service. It could really be useful if people would find that service. We're not contemplating that as we're hurtling forward to develop Phillips. Drives me crazy. I just want to share with you, the frustrations I have. Like there are some places, clearly smart transit should be driving smart development of locations. And in our case, we're developing a new area. In other places, I just keep thinking, if you're going to live rural, you can't expect a bus to come drop outside your house to pick you up. As nice as that would be. So how do we balance that so RAPTA can offer a basic minimum that is fairly competent, but not so much that the community that has a lot of people, Bundler or Aspen, for instance, feel they're being shortchanged because RAPTA is providing really great service in remotest parts of Carbondale, yet there aren't enough buses to keep everybody moving in the upper valley. How do you balance that? So there's a fairness and equity issue, and I totally understand that, but there also has to be an efficiency and use of resources part of that conversation, which you know better than I do. But I'm trying to just flesh out, how this may be perceived in the upper valley. And I think everyone would be supportive. We're all extremely supportive of RAFTA. But at some point, if it looks like we're trying too hard to build out a rural area at the expense of city of Aspen, there'll be some pushback. But how do we walk that tightrope?
It comes back to going on the bus. We're trying to get people to the trunk. You know what I mean? That's sort of fundamental.
Right, the basic.
Versus getting in their car, going through,
The basic.
Sorry, I'm sorry to join late. I had a focused doctor appointment at Grandma.
But kind of to put the RAFTA hat on, I think, it seems like, RAFTA is voters approved bike share, and I think that it's been successful and that's why it's growing. So from a RAFTA perspective, it seems like there would be a compelling case to make to invest in microtransit for areas that bike share isn't benefiting people who want to ride transit. I think that's the part but it's really hard to know I think it was getting back to the comment about the map is like where are areas that aren't being served. Because I can't tell from the microtransit data for the riders who stop at a bus stop if they would have road wrapped anyway. I don't know if it's generating more ridership. And I think that's the part where it seems like there's an implication that this further investment using limited resources is what RAPID needs. Because, RAPID's ridership has steadily increased or pretty packed during peak times, right? So I think, is there compelling data now saying that more people are wanting to ride RAPID, but they can't? And I think that's the part where because I know bike share, has been successful, and I think that it's hard to know with the microtransit still.
Right.
I think to your point to how would the scope of service change? How did that work in conjunction with the map of WeCycle further out, like tentacles, but or are they just overlapping each other?
I think I know we've had this conversation about, the layered effect of, is it all needed? I mean, do we need a Carbondale circulator? Do we need a microtransit? And do we need WeCycle? Or is there too much redundancy being created there?
And what I've learned from doing this forever is I feel like there's no silver bullet, like everything, I hate to say, I would say we need all of them. They all do different things, and I think they're all really important. I gotta say, in terms of impact of the transit system, my son is now 15, and I have to say this summer, we fortunately live right near the BRT station, but he was going to Basalt and a couple other places. And he was able to access all these places in Basalt, not just because of taking the BRT, but because of the BRT and WeCycle. It was this summer. And if we didn't have WeCycle, if we didn't have BRT, we wouldn't have gotten to Basalt. If we didn't have WeCycle, we wouldn't been able to, to get right on that e-bike and get to the far-flung area of Basalt. And I would have been taking him, not only I would have been taking him out there and then back in the morning, and then I'd go out there again and back in the evening. So it wasn't just that we had one or the other, it was because we had both. And I think that because it was summertime, he loved the convenience of getting that e-bike and just going really quickly. There was great. In the wintertime, probably would have been a little bit more inclined towards using the downtowner service or something. So I think, and they all have their different, if you're not comfortable with a bike or an e-bike, not everyone in this room is like us. Not everyone can, for whatever reason, can use an e-bike or a bike. And they may need to use that downtowner service. May not be as convenient, or the circular, whatever it may be. So I think they're all overlapping, and they're all super important. Oh, and by the way, and then when he was there, he met up with Prince Bender's grandson, and they bought out everything in Willits. And so your sales tax is way up.
Great, thank you for that.
All right, that is,
Well,
the other part.
I think that goes to, like your point, David, go to the green, I feel like the part about RAPID being a lead role in helping municipalities and member jurisdictions plan for their first last mile services to see what's really needed and where there's too much redundancy, and that's really a big part of that. I'm watching the time. If we're going to end at 11, which was our original plan. We've got 10 minutes left. It seems like we've got good consensus on these recommendations. It seems like where we need, thinking maybe this is a one more meeting kind of group. With number one, it seems like I'd love to get into some of the funding details. We've talked about a lot of kind of theoretical stuff. I appreciate Kurt kind of elevating that discussion a little bit and really rethinking Raptor's role a little bit. But to Colin's point that I wonder if at a next discussion, having some data on the table about how have we all taxed ourselves already to contribute to both regional and local transit? What are our thresholds that we haven't met yet or that are, still available? If a member jurisdiction, Carbondale said, but I don't know if we can go above the 1% that we've already contributed to RAPT of our sales tax or whatever it is. So that we can kind of see what's on the table. I'm going to continue to advocate from Carbondale's perspective on approaching this from a needs-based point of view for RAPT's contribution to microtransit and first last mile solutions to get to the trunk line. But I think to have, what does that look like? How big are us? How much are we all spending on this kind of stuff? And what are we contributing to the regional efforts? I feel like that would help us. And to look at, there were some really interesting ideas, not recommendations in the staff memo. And we talked about last time about potentially reducing or eliminating some fixed line services that RAPT has been running for a long time that have really low ridership, but they're kind of a legacy of when RAPT started up. And I think Carbondale is open to rethinking the circulator. We've always wanted to rethink that to get past Main Street, but we've never really been able to get there. So is an expanded circulator a more economical option than microtransit? Like, I think that we're open to those kinds of discussions, but that's where that planning effort.
Then at the next meeting, can we also just talk about, quite frankly, what does RAPT have to sell? What could we sell to a sponsor? Whether it's an offset, I don't know. I don't even know how to address that right now, but.
Sell in
in
terms of,
where can we go out and raise money from a sponsor who'd like to be associated? You could say, listen, we're gonna give RAPT $10 million because we know the carbon offset we're generating from reduced drivership and increased ridership is worth that to us. And we can brag about this to the world or demonstrate it to our shareholders, whatever. Those things are real. That happens. Is there a way we can become part of that? Because it seems to me that the one thing we certainly need is more money in order to meet all these ambitions. I really want to see what else is out there in the free market, so to speak, to see if we integrate better with, if there's a Lyft driver out there who would take on the rules of the downtown, the microtransit, why aren't we talking to them?
so that conversation came up last week with our executive team around how can we tap into philanthropic foundations. I know when I was in northern Colorado, there's a philanthropist, Pat Stryker, all the medical beds in hospitals, Stryker beds, and she had a foundation that provided community grants that you could apply to, and that's how we made youth fairs free through a grant that we'd received from this foundation. I think we're a little unclear of what opportunities like that exist in this valley. So anybody that could point us in a direction to kind of, I feel like there's probably a lot more resources like that available here than maybe on the Front Range.
400 to 500 nonprofits all trying to get a.
Yeah.
So you got that, you got philanthropy, and that should be looked at, and there are people who could counsel us on that, no question. I know they are.
Mirta probably could help.
No, too. The other thing is fee for service, like before, the course model has been is to move away from philanthropy or depending on the funding from the county, the city, to go to do, fee for service, where there's something that we can provide to a commercial sponsor. And there may be
a more reliable funding source there, because the philanthropy goes like this. If you can get a 3-year grant, you're doing great, but after 3 years, it's gone and you're wondering where all that money went. So of course, it's key to that now. So yeah, the answer is yes, all the way above. For funding sources. That would be an interesting, thing to understand. What can we offer? What can we tell someone about our carbon savings?
I'm just gonna echo what, and it'd be great for us to know what we're kind of putting in and how we can maximize that. I'll also be really interested, Kurt, I don't know if there's been any conversation with, downtown. So we all individually have contracts. But we know we're probably gonna continue working with them. I don't know what Glen's gonna do. Is there an opportunity there to a bigger, what was it called? I don't know.
Yeah.
Because the bottom line of all this, what a great idea. This has really worked. I mean, the fact that in December, there were over 7,000 rides on the downtown, plus the 10,000 on the circular, 17,000 rides in Carbondale. That's amazing. And we want more people to use transit now. The cost thing is there, and we got to figure how do we pay for all this. But I like the direction we're going. Appreciate all the work staff has done. We got to figure out what are our funding options, short-term, long-term, and also being aware of what's actually going into the pot right now and how can we maximize it. But all great stuff, and we need to be talking about this if the services weren't being used. I mean, between recycle and downtown, we're like, does anybody drive? It's like, wow, it's a lot of transit trips. So really kind of a neat opportunity here, and we're not spending a ton of money, right? Few $1 million. I don't want to undercut that, but we've leveraged RAPTA's program has leveraged a lot of local funding. It's doing great stuff, and it's like, how can we keep it going given what RAPTA has and what some of the local communities have at the moment. Great stuff.
So timeline wise, I'd love staff feedback on, in the last couple minutes here, like, does it make sense for us to schedule one more meeting of this group and really focus on some of those, long-term funding ideas of how much would be generated by phasing out some routes that are really underutilized? What the potential number on, and I know that that's gonna be probably the hardest thing, but Greg's ideas about some external, whether it's philanthropic or fee for service or offsets or whatever it is. Wouldn't expect you guys to come up with, real hard numbers on that. But like, okay, a good case scenario would be this. And looking at what we're all putting in and could we put in more, and start to flesh this out a little bit, or are we getting too far ahead if we're having that discussion and what we're really trying to do is go back to the board right now or soon and say, is there broader board agreement, although a good percentage of the board is here, on, these goals, and then do we wait on the next step? I'd love to see some of them, and I'd love to start getting into that as we talk about moving this from a one-time grant funded source to sustainable funding.
Yeah, and in general, on the funding side, we'll get information regarding what everybody's putting in currently. In general, every member jurisdiction has at least 1 cent or 1 cent plus still available because the state legislature year and a half ago, 2 years ago, added an additional cent to our GAs. And then there's still capacity in property tax as well. So
I think as we think about, though, if we say this is a need-based thing, or if a municipality or jurisdiction wants RAPTA support on their first last mile mobility, then they need to demonstrate need. That might be part of it, is what they're already putting in or their total budget is. I mean, it'd just be good to have some metrics to look at.
Yeah, from your all side too, if there, something that I've struggled with is, well, where do you draw the line? Where does a jurisdiction need funding and when do they not need funding? So trying to create some sort of metric that's transparent, and easy to administer on our side to say, yes, you're eligible for this much funding based on need. That would be very helpful. I don't have a good idea on how to set that up. So throwing that out there, if you all have ideas on knowing your budgets, like we're all ears to try to figure out what that threshold looks like.
It's just an idea. The other thing, things just are not to complicate things, but it's a free service. Does it have to be a free service?
I don't think.
And that's where I think over time, like if we said, okay, Rapton's getting people to and from the bus stop, we would charge differently for some other parts of that to generate some revenue to make our match happen. And I think it would have it shift the ridership. It, you know, in a negative way from Rapton's perspective, maybe like then everybody, you know, we'd have a lot less dipping around town.
Really, fares are a small amount of reference budget, and it's small amount of this, but if you give something away for free that costs as much as it does.
Right.
It's worth it. I think it's, even if it's a buck, okay. And if you're going on, if you're connecting to Rapid, then it's free.
They can make it free.
Yeah, they can dial it in.
And I think that's an area that we should work together, like
Yeah.
there's some consistency
Yeah,
on
that's-
what we're charging for and what we're not. If
Yeah,
we go down that road.
Yeah.
We're pretty much considering charging.
Yep.
Maybe not from the get-go, but letting people know that this will be a
Yeah.
fee-based service, after they get used to it for 6 months or 3 months.
And I think that's what would be interesting next time if we do a little bit of a funding exercise and we say, well, if you charge $5 a ride, you generate this much funding. And if you charge $1 a ride, you generate this much funding.
We could sell like a utility where people just expect a monthly charge on their credit card or on
Subscription.
a subscription service. And after a while it becomes transparent. You don't even think about it. Make it a more reliable funding stream. And it's $5 a month for a Raptor pass or a ubiquitous pass, whether it's rideshare, whatever. Everybody contributes, and then we have, if some people use it more or less, perhaps that's a way to do it.
I think that's a good idea to have an offering like that, because I think there are some people in Basalt, based on their usage patterns, who would pick that up.
Okay, then any thoughts for next time?
Another quick personal anecdote on that. I've always been a little bit against charging a fare for these very short trips. But my son, again, was in town. He had friends coming over and they used the downtowner. As a transportation plan, I'm like, oh my gosh, this young woman, about 15 years old, but very, very fit, why is she taking the downtowner? All I could think was, why is she taking the downtowner service basically less than a mile when she could just, walk that? And all I could think was, we can only do so many trips on this downtowner service, and maybe someone in a wheelchair or something that needs to go 3 miles now can't take the downtowner because she's taking it that lousy half mile or so. So, in some way I started to think, maybe some like a nominal fare for this would kind of weed out those smaller trips and allow for a greater prioritization of better trips. Just to comment too on the subscription service, but
Driver could discriminate. No, I'm not giving you a ride.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to get it to a close here. It's 11:03, and anything else for next time? And do we just want to do I feel like that could be our last meeting.
So we've been planning, I think, on a report out for the February board meeting.
Tentatively planning on a report out in February. Based on this, though, we could report out to the board and then we could meet again, but it seems like if we're just contemplating one more meeting, maybe we should just have that meeting and then do the report out. This data can be a little bit more time consuming to try to pull all together and make consumable. So I'd ask for a little bit more time than just a month to be able to do that.
Do we know, do you think we know what's out there? What other services are out there? What other possible sponsorship opportunities might there? Do we have a good sense of that, or do we need to collect information on that as well?
In terms of where other,
Who can help us with philanthropy? With a sponsorship model?
I can say RAPTA doesn't have a clear picture of what that looks like.
There's some information gathering that.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I want to be careful, Greg. Like, I like those ideas. They're very out of the box. But I want to be careful how much we put on RAPTA staff to explore. Like, unless there's another transit agency using a model like that. Yeah, I just don't know. At this point, it seems like we've got pretty traditional sources of revenue. It's taxes, it's fares, it's grants. like I.
Doesn't seem to be enough.
It doesn't seem to be enough, but I just don't want to send these guys down a rabbit hole of, I don't know how much that could generate, and I'd love to build on, if there's a successful model out there, some transit agency is selling the kinds of sponsorships or credits or whatever that you're referring to, I'm definitely open to incorporating that, so maybe a little bit of peripheral research, but I don't want staff to be in control by every philanthropist and foundation.
I would suggest you supplement some week.
Well, maybe that'll come out of it. Maybe we'll see, we'll kind of have a gap and say, if we did some fairs and if we did some grants and if we did some tax, it's gonna move up.
I have a question. How are planning efforts with the downtowners for, when I'm looking at, because a lot of these things are variable, like what the service level is. And as we plan for 26, especially with the salt, I know, and their seasonal operation, I'm not sure if there's a desire to make it a full year round, but then within a certain budget and then just reduce the services overall. Like, how do you fit your funding? But because I think that there needs to be, as part of the numbers, some iteration back and forth with, I don't know if it's your staff and the downtowner about what the service plan is, not just now, but 26. And then establishing scenarios of fares, ridership, because we're trying to fill a gap, right? And then what that average 3-year thing, we'd have to start running some assumptions about what it looks like, because we don't know what that gap is, and that gap could change. But I think that's the part that it'll be, I don't know, who is that happening? Like, do you guys have staff working on your service plan now? And you guys already know what the cost is this year? And do you guys, is that already a contract?
Yeah. We're proving our smart on it.
And then,
And we're different, we haven't, so the salt has changed their service level at the time. Ours is flat, we're not changing.
and that's just a flat thing without, and just seeing how it looks, right? Seeing what the data looks like
Yeah.
afterwards, and then tweaking it as
And
you
we're
go.
only 6 months, so it's
Right.
limited. So hopefully, without changing anything, we'll have a whole nother year to
Right.
really hone in, and the numbers keep changing based on the service, because people are getting used to it. So in November, only 20% of the downtown trips went to park and ride. In December, it was 33.
Right.
So we don't know what that limit is at this point. So that's why, the whole RAFTA being a key component of discussions with downtown or not. We're just basically saying, let's be in town, here are the operation hours, here's how much it costs, okay, we're paying for it.
And so for next time, it sounds like we're looking at a meeting possibly early March then, to give it more than a month. Maybe late February, I don't know, but I would say our goal for that meeting will be to look at some funding strategies. We won't be making a really specific recommendation on that, but we'd say keep exploring these things. And just to get our heads around what that landscape looks like and how to define metrics for kind of the need-based component. And then I think our goal would be to have some recommendation to be able to bring to the rest of the board after that meeting, right? Even if it's not in the weeds on a long-term funding, but like for next year, for basalt in particular, here's what this looks like. General, this is the direction that we think this program should go. That there's still a lot more work ahead. Does that sound right though for our next and maybe final of these gatherings?
Sorry, I don't mean to delay, but the needs-based aspect, you have a clear understanding of what that is? Is that just a financial need or a need for the service?
That is the financial need on behalf of the jurisdictions. So we would have to explore what options are out there to try to define what a need is.
And in general, we've been talking about if, can you afford it based on the size of your budget? We've got some municipalities with really big budgets, some municipalities with relatively small budgets. And that's the problem.
And some have other dedicated transportation.
Capacity.
Yeah,
Capacity.
that we don't. So, like, we take it out of our general fund.
No, because I think big picture is this is an ongoing O&M. So I would imagine everyone is looking for new revenue sources. So if we had existing revenue sources right now, they weren't really, I guess, dedicated for this long term, right? So that's why I just wanted to make sure I understood if there was how that just understanding.
Well, one that was presented today, but we didn't really highlight it, is the EOTC. What role could they play in this as well?
All right, I'd love to bring it to a close. Anything else for good of the group today? I think we did a good job with our agenda, and thanks to staff for a really detailed memo as well as any questions and presentation and fill the numbers.
Our Transportation Commission.
Anything else for today? Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Meeting adjourned. Thanks, Tori.
Or the transit expansion.
All right. Pretty well.
Greg, Mike.